and welcome to this episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I am your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. We're sponsored by the Freedom Hub, which is the disruptors intersection. All the activists and entrepreneurs are colliding in this space, and we want you to see us make some sausage once again today. We do have a sister show that we run in evenings, which is more related to the medical domain in America, which is a big part of our economy and kind of how we're trying to take back control of that. So here's the archive, but you can certainly catch that live at 7. And again, we want to visit the main site. Everything kind of evolves and revolves around this hub here, your-mp.com, which is standing for the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. When you get there, there's an awful lot to check out, as you can see. But let's focus on a couple of things real quick. On the home tab, you'll notice a few drop downs here. We're on the webinar at the moment, so we're going to come back to this. But the other biggie is to continue in the conversation, because after the webinar, you might want to connect with the person. And so that's where you get the chance to pop over here and find out how to connect with those people and donate, solicit, monitor, blog, post, communicate, whatever fits the bill, you'll see. And there's an awful lot, and I'll show you where we've got some in the history. Also under the Freedom tab, Fighting for Our Freedom, this is a big one as well. This is where we showcase the different organizations that are working hard to make sure we maintain, expand freedoms that we are losing or ones we've seemingly lost already that we need to get restored. And then also at the top, we feature some action items on stuff you need to tap into to kind of make sure that your voice is being heard on the front end of things. But again, if we go back to the webinar tab, here we are on this page. Now, let me zoom up to the top, a little bit of an intro and then a breakout on the 2 separate calls. So we're on the left side here, the 4 o'clock one, and we're going to get into that in a second. And then we also feature who's coming up so you can plan ahead. And then also the links where you get to see all the ones from the past, and they're on all different channels depending on your flavor. And as an example, we click on this Brighteon one, it'll take you over here and you'll see there's a wealth of them that go back over time. All great, but that's where that continuing the conversation comes into play. Because after you watch any of these older ones, you might want to follow up with that person, and that'll be your way to do it. So, but let's talk about what's going down today. And this is where I'm going to, Charles, jump in here and give us a rundown on today's guest.
Gladly, Jeff, and welcome, Shaka. Shaka is someone I ran into almost every Wednesday for a couple of years. When in the early 2000s, I was attending Grover Centerite Coalition on behalf of the Cato Institute, where I was Associate Director of Government Affairs. And for the Institute for Justice, Shaka was telling everyone who was really interested in what he had to say about that incredible legal organization's work to protect a lot of business people and occupations from licensing, which added no value to consumers, and their efforts to roll back the overcriminalization state. And some of the people he was helping were the underserved, and that's part of his presentation today, because this is a school choice event, and this is not a new topic for us. Over the past 3 years, where Jeff and I have hosted 2 webinars every Wednesday, we've had some great school education innovators, including Bob Bowden, a well-known school choicer out of New Jersey, and Jerry Mintz, whom school choicers should know. He is the president and founder of ARROW, the Association for Education Resource Organization. Basically, they're the democratic schoolers, the ones that allow kids to make the rules. And there's a lot of evidence that empowering kids to follow their interests creates better entrepreneurs in adulthood. So school choice, to me, is just a method to produce better experiences for the kids and better adults in a better earth full of good humans. So this is a huge issue. I first came across the issue in '92 when, by coincidence, my great aunt was running for Congress in Milwaukee. And the biggest school choice proponent in the country in '92 was an African-American Democrat named Polly Williams. And she started the first voucher program in the country. I think it's the first program in the country, but it's very well known. And I noticed, Shaka, that Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, is on your board. You have some bigwigs. Joe Lieberman, the well-known senator, Kevin Chavis is there. And I kind of knew about him because in the mid-2000s, I left lobbying to teach in the inner city for 3 years at a charter school that, like many, were closed down for various reasons. It's very tough for troubled kids to meet those math and English standards, which are questionable in their merits. I'm not sure why we have this drilling fixation in the schools, but that's one of the benefits of school choice is it can help families escape a lot of the top-down nonsense. And some of the nonsense chasing families out of schools is the COVID nonsense, the hysteria around that politicized tragedy. And as school districts mandate masks for the returning kids, a lot of parents are going to want to see this recording or join us now to learn how to upgrade their kids' experience in better schools. So Shaka got his start with the American Federation for Children in Tennessee. He helps to train the other state leaders. He's a lawyer, and that is an organization with a lot of quality staff. I checked it out. So that's the intro, Jeff.
All right, very good. And it's kind of a nice reminiscing about Polly Williams, because I had a chance to meet her. She came here to spread the message here to Cleveland, and Fannie Lewis picked up on that and started to try to expand that here in town. And she brought all these kids and had them go through all of what they were able to do and know, and everybody was swept away that these kids schooled in that fashion were so skilled. So I'm excited to hear what you have to tell us, Shaka. I'm going to give the screen over to you here.
Thank you. Well, thanks to you both, Jeff and Charles, and thanks everybody for tuning in and watching this, even if you're not watching in real time. Again, I'm Shaka Mitchell. I'm the Director of State Strategy and Advocacy for the American Federation for Children. And yeah, boy, I mean, just from that intro, Charles, so many things that I kind of want to touch on. You really set it up nicely and framed it nicely. I mean, that first private school choice program, you're absolutely right. It was in 1990. It was in Milwaukee. And that effort was led by inner city, Democratic, African-American leaders and policymakers, elected officials. You had Polly there. You had Howard Fuller, superintendent of schools, who said, yeah, let's do this. And I think they realized early on, I shouldn't say realized, but maybe just acknowledged and said it out loud that, hey, the system that we've had isn't working. And as pertained to the community that they were in, I said, listen, it's not enough just to have to talk about equal access into the public school system. We want to know how our kids are actually doing, right? And I encountered that a lot. As Charles mentioned, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and so we still, deal with the vestiges of segregated schools, of neighborhoods that were redlined in ways that do all sorts of, I would say, have had unintentional consequences, some intentional consequences with our community, but with making for a school system that just doesn't serve kids well. And a lot of people realize, hey, the fight that happened, the civil rights fight that happened in the 60s to get kids in schools, it's not over. And it's not over because the same school system exists. You've got this largely the same bureaucracy, maybe even worse, I might argue, because you didn't have the U.S. Department of Education back then. So you've got an education bureaucracy that is not adaptive. I know this program and really the Freedom Hub is kind of at this intersection of liberty and entrepreneurship. Well, you don't see much entrepreneurship in a system where one provider effectively claims 80 to 85% of the market share, higher than that in some cities. And so anyway, there's all of this kind of comes to light when you start thinking about school choice. We are now seeing a wave of school choice programs, and I will get into what one of those looks like for folks who may be unfamiliar with the concept. So I'll talk a little bit about what that's looked like in Tennessee, but we're seeing a wave of it across the country right now. And I think some members of the media would probably like to portray this in kind of in an alarmist way, in a way that's really reactionary. Meaning, whether it's some of the conversation around culture and curriculum that's now happening surrounding schools, or public health and COVID, and whether it's, to mask or not to mask, right? That now is the question. Those things are happening, yes, and parents can differ about their inclinations to those questions. But I think really what's happening is that in many communities, in my own, you have parents who, starting in the spring of 2020, right, all of a sudden their children were at home. And they realized a few things. First, they realized just how ill-equipped the system was to adapt and to change quickly, right? All of a sudden, you had businesses. I can think of businesses who, for instance, were in alcohol sales, who pivoted really quickly and all of a sudden started producing hand sanitizer, right? Same thing with other PPE and so forth. I don't mean to make this a debate about medical technology, et cetera, but it's a pretty amazing thing that you had multiple companies who, private sector companies that dove in and started working on a vaccine, with pretty amazing speed, especially for folks who are old enough to remember health maladies from, the previous century. Many of those things happened really quickly. Restaurants pivoted, and had takeout, et cetera. But what about our schools? For many millions across the country, the schools just shut down. And I think parents were willing to give schools a pass in, say, March, April, May of 2020. But when that continued, and when you started seeing some of the entrenched interests, particularly your teachers unions, state teachers unions, urban teachers unions, predominantly, started effectively holding kids hostage and holding the entire system hostage, I think a lot of parents said, enough, this is not working for us. We need some options, especially when you consider that there were many schools, private schools, that remained open the entire 2021 school year, right? So imagine if you're a parent, your children are at home. Maybe you have connectivity issues because of the internet. In my own family, we have 3 children. All 3 of them were at home. We had moments when there were 5 of us trying to do Zoom calls simultaneously, right? We are really blessed to have the resources to pay for 1 gig fiber, and it was still a strain, right? We're still trying to find technology. We're trying to find quiet spaces where kids can learn without distraction. It was a system that was not ideal. Meanwhile, there's a private school about a mile from my house that was in session the whole time. And so I think it forced parents to think, if they can do it and do it in a way that's safe, why not us? Simultaneously, nationwide, we spend just shy of $16,000 per pupil to educate kids. So I think people are looking at this and they're going, wait a minute, if we're spending $16,000 per pupil, why in the world is my kid getting a subpar education at home? When I say subpar, there may be folks that think, that's hyperbole. I'm going to show you some numbers to kind of illustrate what that looks like. But I do want to give a few notes about AFC, the American Federation for Children, and just kind of our mission, because I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. We are not a private school advocacy organization. We believe that every family has a right to meaningful school choice. And when I say meaningful school choice, really what I mean is that neither cost nor geography should be a barrier, right, to getting a good education. School choice has always existed in the US. but it exists for folks who have money, who can afford to either move to a neighborhood where the schools are, ostensibly better and work for their children, or it exists for families who have the means to pay, to have their pick among schools. Unfortunately, that is not the vast majority of situations. I should also say that every state constitution deems education to be a critical function of its state government. So, as Charles mentioned, I was formerly with the Institute for Justice. I fully recognize that there is no federal constitutional right to an education. It's not mentioned in our U.S. Constitution. However, every state has acknowledged this as a valuable institution. And so states put resources behind this. They put money behind this. They put effort behind this. And what I would say is, even if, unfortunately, you can afford to move into a neighborhood that has a, quote, good school, what you very quickly realize is that your children are different, and children with the same parents, with the same general upbringing, they might be twins. They may still learn differently, have different interests, and almost certainly they have different interests and want to pursue different things. That is a beautiful thing and should be celebrated and encouraged. Unfortunately, our system, as it stands, kind of tries to shoehorn this great multitude of children and personalities and interests and diversity into the same system. And we just think that's, it's outdated. It doesn't work. So I'm going to share just a few things very quickly. And so if folks will just bear with me 1 sec, we'll get this moving. So one of the things that I like to note is that, again, school choice is not a new idea. I mean, in practice, families have had school choice for a very long time, but it's mostly parents of means, right? So hopefully folks can see this. I like to ask people, hey, what are your hopes for your child? Because, again, children are different. And if you think about your individual children, you'll likely find that you have different hopes and dreams for them. As I mentioned, school choice is not a new thing. So here is something that Reagan said. This is early in his term, President Reagan. Our leaders must remember that education doesn't begin with some isolated bureaucrat in Washington. It doesn't even begin with state or local officials. Education begins in the home, where it is a parental right and responsibility. One of the greatest, I'll say, innovations, I think that we've seen in the past 18 months during this COVID season is what you might call pandemic pods or learning pods or micro schools, right? These, and essentially all it is people doing what they've often done and really always done in the United States of America, and that is band together in communities and small groups to come up with solutions. So it's parents on the same block who might say, hey, let's get together and get our kids together so that they can be in a safe environment, one where they can learn, maybe have some community with one another, and there's maybe an adult who can help them out with, say, math in the morning, and maybe they're doing social studies and science in the afternoon, whatever it is. These can take lots of different forms, but what you saw is parents making a way. Now, all the while parents were making a way and figuring this out, their schools who were closed were still receiving those per pupil dollars. So one has to ask, well, what in the world were we doing with all those funds? Reagan also has another great quote. This is from the report, A Nation at Risk. He says, and this now, A Nation at Risk is, almost 40 years old, says something to the effect of, when considering the outcomes that our public education system has yielded, if another country were to do this to our children, we would consider that an act of war. So again, this is not a new problem. This isn't something that AFC just, woke up and thought, hey, maybe we should tinker in this area. This is a long-standing problem because we do believe that an educated citizenry is one of the bedrocks of an ongoing, representative democracy as we have. So again, I want to talk about what school of choice looks like just kind of practically, and then open it up for some questions and for some discussion. Really want to make this helpful. So one of the ways that I'll say that this might look, might take on a few different forms. And at AFC, we are really agnostic as to what type of school a student ultimately is placed at. We think parents really do have their children's best interests at heart. And we also think that parents don't need to be education so-called experts, right? We expect that people can do things all the time, even lacking some expertise, right? And part of that is the market working itself out. Part of that is having systems in place where you have maybe trusted advisors and friends who can say, hey, let me help steer you in a direction that works a little bit better for your family. So we don't care ultimately if children attend their zone school. If that works for your kid, fantastic. But if it doesn't, we want to make sure that money is portable, that you can go to maybe a charter school, a public charter school of your choice, a private school. We want to make sure that there aren't limitations on homeschooling if you want to do that. So we really want to let 1,000 flowers bloom, so to speak. I would say when it comes to private choice, this takes on a few forms. Sometimes it's a tax credit scholarship program, and that is where usually businesses can contribute a portion of their tax burden to a pot that then gets divvied up into scholarships for kids. That's one, tax credit. A voucher program, which is what many on this call might be familiar with. This is something that economist Milton Friedman discussed, and this is the idea that the funds, rather than say $10,000 going directly to a zoned public school, that a parent would direct those funds right towards the private school of his or her choice. And that's great, but that's kind of like a single-use thing, right? It's a single-use voucher. You can use it for tuition. I'd say what we've seen in many states now, Missouri just passed one, Tennessee passed one a few years ago. You've now got them in North Carolina, Alabama, Arizona, a few other states. And these are education savings accounts. So it's kind of borrowing a concept from the healthcare system, the health savings accounts. And it's doing something like this. It's where, and this again is an example from Tennessee, where you might have the state dollars that would otherwise travel with a student to a school, and instead would go into a parent's account. And then the parent can direct that money. It can be used for tuition, but when there are funds that are left over, it can be used for other things, online learning platforms or testing fees, future educational expenses like college, vocational tech education. We've got in Tennessee, we have a specific ESA for students with special needs. Students with special needs often need supports that go beyond what you might see in a more typical classroom. And so this really gives parents the ability to direct those funds. These ESAs have really, I think, risen in popularity over the past few years as people are becoming more familiar with the technology behind it. Frankly, because you can put money in an online account, it's really secure. You're not sending out checks. So this ESA, we think, is really a powerful thing. So powerful, in fact, both the ESA and school of choice, that according to our most recent poll, this is from June of this year, 74% of those polls, this is a nationwide poll, supported the concept of school choice, 74%. So that's the highest number that we've ever seen. We ask this question twice a year. It's not only the highest percentage that we've ever seen, but it was also the biggest jump. And I think, again, it's because people are saying, hey, many of our kids have been at home. We've got to have some other options. We've got to have some ways to make this system work better for our kids. There's lots of different ways we can tinker in a program like this with the eligibility. Some programs are means tested, some are based on geography, many different ways. A lot of it just has to do with a state's law and kind of the context and the climate in that state. But what I want to do, I want to switch really quickly to a different share here, because I want to show, I mentioned I would show what's the need. You know, is this just hyperbole? And I would say, no, it's not hyperbole. So I'm going to share this and show you some of the current data. So this is data that was just released by the Tennessee Department of Education. And here you can see, this is the, actually, I'm going to scroll up. This is the proficiency. In Tennessee, we have 4 tiers from top to bottom. It's mastered, on track, approaching, and below. And let me, by the way, give the caveat that not every parent is as consumed with academic data as maybe folks at the Department of Ed. And we think that's okay also, right? There are many families who are making a decision about school, again, in a personalized way. And so they may say, hey, I'm looking for a school where my child can really excel at the arts, or maybe my student does have a developmental disability. And so we are looking for a school that can really work with our child. And academic mastery isn't what we're going for. That's fine. Nevertheless, we do think this data is important, right? The vast majority of students, 80-ish%, 85% across the country still attend public schools. And so we do think, in the interest of transparency, we think that this data is important because it does help parents make informed decisions. And so we would encourage private schools that, hey, if you have data, that data should be your friend, right? So go ahead and use it. Here are some of the takeaways, though. So we've got these four tiers. You can see on that right-hand column there that only 5% of students in Tennessee, we test in grades 3 through 11, only 5% of students mastered the academic content across all 4 subjects, only 5%. 26% were on track. So, combine that. So that's only 31% of Tennessee students are on track or have mastered content at their grade level. 31%. I would say it's worse when you break that down by student group. So, for instance, look at that at the group of students with disabilities. That number is only 9% combined. Black African American students, only 13%. In fact, 0% registered as having mastered academic content on grade level. This is not acceptable. Here's the chart. And so I think this is especially instructive when thinking about what COVID has done. We would say that COVID didn't create academic gaps. Frankly, it removed the scales so that people could see some of the academic gaps and the shortcomings of the system. But speaking to the fact that many school districts were not ready, were not nimble enough to pivot to an online, domain. Let's take a look at the elementary school. I had a kindergartner last year. Well, in elementary school, for those who were in person, 45% of the kids were on track or mastered. But that number, when you go to remote, that number drops to 22. So from 45% of the kids to 22%. Keep in mind that this these numbers have a legacy, right? In elementary school, we start testing in third and fourth, or in third grade. So that 22%, those numbers only tend to shrink over time. We don't typically see a larger number of students gaining in proficiency over time. So if we're starting in 2021 at 22%, I mean, it's really tragic to think of what that will look like. In a kind of coda back to the earlier discussion about my time at the Institute for Justice and litigating on behalf of families, we are engaged in litigation right now with our partners, IJ, and with the state partner, the Beacon Center of Tennessee, because as it turns out, our two largest districts in Tennessee, that's Memphis and Nashville, have sued the ESA program in Tennessee. Those two districts were remote the vast majority of the school year. So those two districts make up the bulk of the numbers that you see on the screen right now. High school proficiency numbers, where only 21% of our high school students who were in a remote setting were on grade level. I submit to you that despite having only 21% of our high schoolers on grade level, the state of Tennessee's graduation rate is still above 85%. So we have to ask the question, when we give a diploma to a student, what exactly are we saying that student is ready for? Unfortunately, the answer is not much in an economy, in a world that is increasingly global, that is moving faster than ever. And so we think that it's time that the education system kind of keeps up with that. So I will stop, because I know that's a lot of ground that I covered. And there may be some questions, or Jeff and Charles, you may have some questions, or maybe things that I didn't cover that I should go back and cover. So let me stop sharing my screen and kick it back over to you.
Okay, very good. Well, that was very compelling. And obviously this has been an issue that's been brewing and building like anything does over the years, until finally, and the luxury was for COVID, is it accelerated what was going to probably take a bunch of more years to finally get to where we are this second. But the other question, though, that it begs is, like anything that's a government thing is like the day they created it, it hasn't changed much since that day. So now we're talking decades on this one here. Would it maybe be better if the whole thing was just scrapped, and that just parents had money and they just sent kids, like I decided to go to McDonald's over Wendy's today, and because you're really just giving everybody their money right back in these vouchers and the like. And if anybody needed money that just didn't have it, then there's plenty of places that historically that would be more than willing to give money to those kids or families. Yeah. Is there any push to do that, or they just want to keep trying to make the old, just bandage up or jury rig this old system to somehow make it viable?
No, I think, it's a great question. I think there's probably there's two ways to, or maybe a couple of different ways to think about it. One is that unfortunately, even if we did, if tomorrow we just started sending out, checks, so to speak, right? Putting money in accounts for families. I guarantee you, if you handed the keys to a typical zoned public school leader right now, they are not equipped to come up with they don't even do their own school level budgeting usually, right? So they are not equipped to run it in a manner that even would allow them to frankly accept payment. They don't even know how much the thing costs, which is just absurd. So in some ways, it's like we have dealt with such a monopoly, unfortunately, in this setting, that if you just let it go kind of full bore at this point, I fear that it would take so long for us to recalibrate that that there would be a lot of kids left in the lurch in the meantime. Now, I will say, you do have states that have town tuitioning programs where they have done this. And so it can be done. I'd say the scale of it matters. So I believe that Vermont does this. It's easier to do in a place like Vermont, right? Where you just have fewer people, the scale isn't as large. Trying to do this in, say, a Florida California, Texas, New York, et cetera, would become much more challenging. But I'm with you. I mean, we are long overdue. We're driving around, Model Ts in kind of a Tesla world.
Yeah, and in that regard, speaking of the IJ, Institute for Justice, it's almost like maybe they'll succeed in the way that the taxi cab monopolies kind of got broken up, where you just kind of frit around the edges long enough and the center either has to adapt or just collapse under its own weight at that point. So it seems like that's the way it's going to go, especially when you frame it like that, because they're entrenched. It's too set up. Like you said, it's like trying to rip up all the toll booths by tomorrow. It just isn't going to work. Charles, I see your hand is up.
It is. Got a few questions, but there's other folks with their hands up. So don't let me monopolize time there, Jeff. I can imagine school choice being helpful for all types of families, including those with disabled kids. And I noticed that in the title of your organization is, for the children. And, one impetus for school choice growth is the hysteria around COVID. And people are up in arms right now in the media about vaccine mandates that have impacted kids for decades. And the latest studies show over 1,000% less chronic disease with the unvaccinated kids. And I've got to imagine that as parents seek higher quality education and, try to find out why half of our kids now are chronically diseased, is that an issue that ever crosses your organization's door? It would seem to me that we would want to kind of slow down on these medical mandates as they correlate with the chronic disease explosion.
Yeah, I think our organization doesn't take a position on, on the say vaccination or mask mandates, right? However, I think one of the things that it's showing is that a system where you have, say, in a large city, right, a major urban area, you might have a school board of 9 people, where you've got a 9-person school board making decisions for 200,000 kids. You're going to get a one-size-fits-all system, right? It's not you're never going to have the kind of flexibility and personalization that accounts for just the diversity of situations. And so, I was stunned to hear recently at a meeting, a school board member say, well, on the one hand, we're going to be in person, and say, okay, great. The data says that kids seem to do better. On balance, they're doing better if they're in person versus remote in a system that's not ready for that. But then turned around and said, but if your student has COVID or is exposed and must be outside, can't come to school anymore in person, we're not going to offer any kind of remote option. Well, that's absurd. We're living in a situation now where we've got to be willing to have a system that is more customized. I just think that's the way the world is going. And so, again, our organization doesn't take a position on what parents want to do, because we think that parents are really the point of sale. Parents need to make the decision on behalf of their children, what's best for their family. And it's just clear that most public school districts are not, frankly, able to customize if they're even willing. And I would say most are not even willing, because right now there's, if public schools are going to get funded, this has been the thinking, we get funded regardless of whether or not you're happy and you're satisfied. And that's a tragic way to go about doing business.
It's easy to do when you're the only game in town, though, right?
That's right. That's
Brittany,
right.
Brittany, I see your hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Sure can.
So I'm in California, and there's a lot of talk out here. We're kind of at the epicenter of how bad things can get as far as the restrictions. And there's a lot of talk out here about using the private membership association model for starting independent schools. And partly because it's just a way of getting around a lot of the nonsense, but also like getting around licensing and other requirements. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I mean, I think so. It calls to mind, those micro schools and pods that I kind of brought up, right? And those are in such a new space that we were really watching that to see, all right, how are cities going to react to this new movement? Because we do find that, for better or worse, where districts seem to take notice is when the revenue starts walking out the door, right? When parents start saying, hey, this is not working for me, we got to go, we're out. Eventually that will result in less revenue. And that's when they start to take notice. I would say, a few things to consider. And that is frankly, to be aware of threats at the local level, like zoning law threats. We saw that, I believe, in Austin, Texas. The city of Austin tried to do this, where all of a sudden you had parents banding together, saying, hey, a family down the street that we know wants to come over, they want to send their kids over because mom and dad have to go to work. Fine, send your kids over here. They can sit around our dining room table and they can all learn together. And the city of Austin was trying to say that, well, that constitutes a school. And so you're going to have to comply with ADA and other school zoning, health and safety code requirements, which is just absurd. So I would say stay attuned to that local zoning piece, because that's where you can have folks who are kind of your busybody city council types who want to get their hands in it. I mean, I think there are a lot of great tools. I'm not going to, don't take me to be like hawking. I get no kickbacks from this, but there's a model out there. It's called Prenda Schools. And there are a lot of models now, Khan Academy, that have great, pieces of online curriculum, or can even train, train parents or other adults to teach and to do this outside of the traditional system. So I think that we can really be equipped to do this well, to serve students well. So I'm really, I would encourage it, but like I said, watch out for those local zoning folks. I also think, what we want to think about with state level policy is that, frankly, it's the system I would prefer is that parents who are doing that can take their education dollars, and in California that's quite high, but can take those education dollars and can use those dollars for their children in a new setting, in a non-public school setting.
Very good. Charles, I see you got your hand up again there.
I do. And Shaka, continuing on the concern for our children's health around education, it seems with the complaints about the digital divide and the struggle underserved families especially had with remote learning, there will be a freight train momentum effort to get them broadband, whether it's wired or wireless. And so now we see companies given school district contracts to put 5G wireless antenna on the roof of the schools, outside people's apartments. And, the government's health studies are pretty clear from the toxicology program that kids especially are sensitive to the radiation effects of the wireless. So I wonder if that's an issue that is something you've seen with the school choice movement as people try to find better schools, is the increasing concern about wireless versus wired. I mean, I think a lot of folks love broadband with fiber optics. I'm not sure, it might be Chattanooga has a community broadband and wired system that's fast, secure, and safe. So, that's a concern for the children, is the increasing exposure to wireless when it doesn't have to be, because there's so much better systems with wired fiber optics.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about the wired versus wireless health concerns as it as it pertains to this. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think a lot of states, that realize that it's the large urban districts that get the attention. But boy, we have a lot of students who live in the areas in between, right? And so may lack reliable internet service. And so how do we deliver instruction to them? There again, I think I would put it on parents and really trust parents. I mean, I can speak for our family. Just in general, we had done our best to keep our kids off screens most days of the week. I mean, we had movie night on Friday nights, and that was it pre-pandemic. Now we've got, you trip over Kindles in every room, it seems like, and all my girls were issued Chromebooks, and I think it's still incumbent on parents to determine what they are comfortable with, both from a health risk standpoint and also from a learning style standpoint. You've got to, just because it may be efficient for a school district to, I know some school districts were sending home hotspots. It may be efficient for a school district to send home hotspots. We are not trying to build a system for efficiency because our kids are not widgets. We are trying to make sure that every one of them can sort of realize their fullest potential. And I think it's totally within bounds for parents to demand that of their policymakers and city leaders.
You have a follow-up there, Charles?
Different question, get you off the hot seat there. I forgot to mention another past speaker of ours was Robert Enlow from that Friedman Foundation for Vouchers. I'm a lobbyist, different clients, and one funny thing I'm sure you've noticed is the internecine warfare among activists, no matter what market you get into, and it's kind of silly. I was wondering, in your school choice advocate world, is there more cooperation or competition? Number one, are you at each other's throats, or are you helping each other out? And then second, what are some of the more innovative choice models you've seen out there? I mentioned Jerry Mintz from the student-led learning world. That's real radical, but I think parents are going to really be surprised how successful that model is. It's foreign for most people. They have no idea what it is, but it's growing. So those two questions.
Yeah. So just to clarify, it's the second question about that kind of model that's more student-led.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll admit, I don't know much about that model. I mean, I helped start a number of charter schools. So I've seen I've seen a few different charter school models. My kids have been to, they're currently in kind of an expeditionary learning school and have been in Montessori. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, listen, I think great teachers do a lot of listening. Maybe great leaders do a lot of listening, right? Great teachers do a lot of listening to see what kids respond to and what their needs are. Now, kids also want to do things that kids want to do. So I don't know that any kid wakes up and just says, you know what, I think I'd really, really love to learn how to balance an equation in chemistry. That's just not intuitive. So I would need to learn more about it, but yeah, let's listen to children. That's super important. On your question about competition versus cooperation, I love Robert Enlow. I mean, frankly, it's a big reason that I joined AFC when I was considering, when I was leaving the charter school organization I was with and was thinking about joining AFC. I asked Robert, I said, hey, what do you think? And he was actually really encouraging. And we've known one another for a long time. We worked with, it's now called Ed Choice. The Friedman Foundation is now called Ed Choice. And we worked with them in many of our states. Their organization is a C3, so they don't engage in lobbying. Our organization does. So I think part of it is like, let's see what tools we have in the toolbox collectively and do this. Now, as with anything, as you kind of alluded to, Charles, this kind of politics it's the most, what's that quote? It's the most vicious and bitter when the stakes are low, right? So often you can end up really getting into it with your friends over like one line of proposed legislation. But in terms of just being fellow travelers, I think we are we are all oriented in the same direction. How do we increase choice for parents? And let's move with urgency. Let's be realistic, but let's absolutely move with urgency. There's not a perfect way to do it. And so I think we're constantly just trying to evaluate the landscape in in this state or that state to see how we get it done. But I think there's been a lot of coordination. And I think we also make really good, like collectively as a sector, we make really good use of the tools. Now, I will say that the charter school leaders, and we support charters, but I think many charter school leaders and organizations are kind of having an existential crisis right now because one of the best things about a charter school is it's still a public school. And so things like funding stream are much more known. One of the worst things about being a charter school is it's still a public school. And so you still have so much of the administrative bureaucracy to deal with the district and with the state. And that really saps resources, whether it's personnel, time, cost of compliance, et cetera. And so I think right now charter schools are I know of a charter school leader who told me, if we had the ESA program when we opened as a charter school, we would have opened as a private school instead. Because I also think that a private school is more likely to be able to sustain a mission, sort of a non-academic mission, longer than a public school of any variety. And so I took your question in kind of a different way, but I do think there is a tension sometimes among my friends who are in the charter school space and in the more private choice space.
Two interesting points you made out of that, though, was the fact that, once they get on that trajectory of having that steady income, then the need to do anything just completely diminishes, where you start to lean on the shovel. But if you got to, like you said, if this was a private thing, we were fighting for those dollars. People you like the idea of being challenged. You almost get bored and upset and angry at schools when there's nothing to do. If I was a teacher, challenged all the time. But the other thing you also exposed was kind of what I made that comment earlier. There's the pods and this and that. So it's everybody trying to work around, instead of being there, saying, well, can I get permission from the authority to be on the edge of the ranch? Which means you're still like an extension of them, when really what we're all asking for, Charles and I keep talking about, is just like get them the heck out altogether, because then everyone's going to come up with some cockamamie idea, and some will stink and some will be awesome, but we'll learn from the awesome and the others will fail. And right now it's such a stranglehold on creativity because, so every kid is so different. Would they say with Edison, okay, it's time to now work on music, stop doing all that math over there, Thomas, we're done now. Did you see the clock? It's the music hour. So, that's not good. And that's how they all function. Even a lot of charter, even some other homeschooling stuff is almost too set because it's just a clone of the old model.
Yeah, that's right. No, I think we can get really, formulaic, but again, I don't think that education is a zero-sum game, right? I think we don't know what the limit is, if there's a limit on human potential, especially when you're talking about children. And so we ought to have a system that encourages that potential to really thrive, rather than trying to say, hey, can we fit it? Can we still fit it into these three boxes? That's old school. I will say, if I can, and Charles, you may have another question, or Jeff, but one thing that we put together and would love for your viewers to check out is we started thinking kind of during the pandemic, like, hey, what if maybe let's not just assume that returning to the old system is what everybody wants, right? What if we, rather than going kind of back to normal, we said, what if we try to be better than normal? And so we put together it's kind of a documentary, but we would actually love, particularly for this viewership, to solicit ideas. You can share your ideas on this, but there's a website. It's called betterthannormaleducation.com. and I can just share that really quickly so folks can see it. But Better Than Normal Education.com. Again, we'd love for people to check out that video. You can see here sort of the landing page. You can share your own ideas for how to make the next system, whatever comes after this pandemic. We want it to be much improved on what we currently have. And so you can see the video there. You can see parents who've already shared some ideas, maybe some questions that they have. There's also some other smaller videos down at the bottom. You can even upload a video if you like. So yeah, we never want to stop learning from other parents, other educators, so that we just don't go back to the same old habits and assume that what we had in the past with some nostalgia that it worked, because it didn't. It never worked for every kid.
Definitely not. So that's good to see that you're taking advantage of the situation. Charles, did you want to squeeze in a last question before we have to dart out today?
No, I'll just comment on that. You know, when I got my master's, to leave lobbying and go teach in DC's inner city for a few years, when I, as a libertarian, I sought out those education scholars who are radical, you know, John Taylor Gatto, all the good ones. And they have books out and ideas that are fantastic if they could be implemented. Student-led learning, provocation stimulates a desire to learn more, hands-on, creative. There's so much in this better than normal idea you have, Shaka, that we should exploit. And that was the theme last week, Jeff, with Jonathan Heinlein on the metaverse. And yeah, there's a lot of people that would like to know about that website, I think.
That's for sure. We'll make sure that's in the credits for everybody. So that'll be excellent. So on that note, Jack, unfortunately, we've reached the end of today's road. But I appreciate it. It was fantastic. And very importantly, everybody gets to continue the conversation, which we'll definitely encourage you to do that. Get back in there and take a look. Let me zip back over there for 2 seconds. That's where you get back over here, and we'll have him up here right away. So you'll have a chance to connect after today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Really, thanks to you both.